Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of the third episode of Season 2 of Lower Decks, called We'll Always Have Tom Paris. And I think this was maybe the funniest episode of the whole show yet. I actually laughed out loud in many of the jokes in this episode, and a lot of them I think are dependent on you knowing the older Star Trek shows. Without it, some of the funniest jokes wouldn't work. So this might be a problem for people who didn't see or don't remember a lot of details from the other Star Trek shows. Then you wouldn't get a lot of the references, a lot of the jokes. But for people like me who do remember, those jokes are really funny. Also, as always, there were a lot of correct references to all the other shows, and what I loved in this episode is that most of them were there not just to be there, but they actually served some kind of purpose for the story of the episode. And so they didn't just feel like cheap references for the sake of it, just as Easter eggs. Instead, it just felt like it's simply set in the same universe that was set up in the previous shows. And so that's why it felt much more alive. It felt much more natural, and it flowed together well. The only problem in this episode is that maybe it breaks the fourth wall a little bit too much, meaning it becomes a straight up parody of the older shows and not simply another show set in the same universe, in the sense that they're poking fun at things like bridge officers coming back from the dead constantly, as if it's happening all the time. And obviously it's a joke about the fact that it did happen all the time in all the previous shows, so it's a good joke, it works as a comedy. However, the fact that everybody knows about it and treat it as if it's a commonplace, that they're not even wondering about it anymore, and they seem to know all about, Genesis device, the Nexus, mirror universe, as if all of those things are common knowledge. And so it's a bit of a problem, because usually they would say that some of that stuff is classified, that people simply don't know about it for obvious reasons. You wouldn't want people to try to resurrect their loved ones all the time using all these techniques and going to the mirror universe or all that kind of stuff. Would basically make death meaningless in the Trek universe, and that's not a good idea, even though technically it happened already. You know how many characters came back to life so many times. So for a joke it works, for a parody it's perfect. However, the fact that they treat it as if it's nothing, then the next time someone actually dies on the show, we wouldn't believe it. And the next time it happens, we'll know that they can come back from the dead anytime. So it kind of cheapens the impact of actual death on the show. And so what happened with Shax coming back worked really well as a comedy, but you wouldn't feel any sense of danger to any character in the future. So it's a little bit of a problem. And other things like Boimler being basically a fanboy of the other shows, as if you watch them, he's a fan of Voyager and the Voyager crew, and he even hums the theme song of Voyager when he goes in the corridor. And so stuff like that kind of breaks the fourth wall a little bit too much. But on the other hand, it is funny, so I'm kind of okay with that, because it's worth it to do it for the sake of the comedy. And so even all the jokes about coming back from the dead, I think, are funny enough that it justifies breaking the fourth wall and removing all sense of danger. No, it is a comedy show, it's probably going to stay comedy for most of the show anyway, so why not just go with it and just make it as comedic as possible. So overall, I think the jokes were funny enough that it makes it worthwhile to do what they did. And so most of the jokes I found really funny, especially the Kazan joke in the end. And as I said long ago, I am a big nitpicker, and I'm still going to mention all the little continuity issues and stuff like that. But when the show is fun, when the show is entertaining, I'm willing to forgive all kinds of mistakes like that, because the show overall is entertaining. So, small nitpicks like, why is there a Jeffries tube above the bridge? Isn't the bridge supposed to be on the top of the ship? So it's technically a mistake, but it was used for maybe the funniest joke in the episode, when Boimler fell from the Jeffries tube to the bridge, and he was all messed up from all the stuff he went through, and so he looks like a Kazon, and then Tom Paris sees him and shouts a Kazon and attacks him. And so because that joke was so funny, I'm willing to forgive the fact that why is there a Jeffries tube above the bridge. I don't think there's a big mistake. We can still say that's the top deck, but there's some maintenance stuff just above the bridge, and there's enough thickness of the hole that we can imagine that it fits there. And so I don't really have any problem with this so-called mistake. And Boimler was trying to get to the bridge, and so it makes sense for him to be in that vicinity. So I was totally fine with that little issue. Other continuity issues, when they went to the planet Quailor 2, that's actually a planet we've seen in the TNG episode Unification. The color of the planet is completely different, even though the cloud formation is very similar. So this is a mistake that I can easily explain away by saying that maybe at different times of year the atmosphere looks a little bit different, or it depends on the angle at which you're looking at it, and it also has a moon now, which we didn't see in that other episode. So maybe in that one the moon was behind the planet. So we can explain all that kind of stuff away. So overall, I thought there are no big contradictions. When we saw this planet in unification, we did see a bar on the planet, and that's basically all we saw of it. So in this episode, the whole planet is full of bars and all of that. This is kind of funny as well, because it's like, in the continuity of previous shows, whenever they showed us some place on the planet, then the next time we see that planet, it's all like that one place that we saw them going to the planet, that's how the entire planet is like. That's something that was always kind of funny in Star Trek, that if they land on a planet and it's a desert, then it must be that the entire planet is a desert. If they land on a place that is icy, then the entire planet is an ice planet. That's the way it always was. And so the fact that we saw a glimpse of that planet in TNG and it was a bar, that means in this episode the entire planet is full of bars. And when we see a wide shot of the street of that planet, we even see that there's a Quark's bar there and Vic Fontaine and stuff like that. So I guess all that stuff from Deep Space Nine became a franchise of bars and restaurants. We saw that in Picard as well, that there's Mott's barber shops on various planets and all that kind of stuff. I'm kind of okay with those kind of references. It's kind of over the top. It's kind of, again, breaking the fourth wall a little bit. So there's a Quark's bar on every planet now and all of that. So it's a little bit silly, but again, in this show it's a comedy, so I'm okay with that. And then they go to another planet, which we saw in TNG's Tapestry episode, about Picard's first deep space assignment on some starbase, and actually went back and checked, and we didn't actually see any outside shot of that base in Tapestry. And in this episode of Lower Decks, they did show it from outside, and it looked like other starbases we've seen on other planets. So technically there is no contradiction. We can simply assume that's one of the common models of how Starfleet builds their starbases on different planets. And the fact that the distance between the two planets we saw in this episode was so short that they went from one planet to the other in what seemed like no more than a few hours, because this is all taking place at the same time as Boimler is still crawling through the Jeffries tubes. So it can't be more than a few hours, unless we can assume maybe he spent a few days there. I guess it's possible. But anyway, there is no actual contradiction of how far those two planets that we saw in TNG are from each other. So technically it's possible they are really close by. So there is no big contradiction, and so therefore I'm totally fine with that. And it was kind of funny how nothing changed. Like 40 years ago Picard was at that base and there were Nausicaans there, and now there are still Nausicaans there playing the same game. So it's kind of silly, but in a good way. I guess maybe that place is close to Nausicaan space, and Nausicaan culture really loves that game, so that's why they're still playing it and still challenging Starfleet officers and all of that. So this was kind of a cute reference, which doesn't directly contradict anything. I guess it's kind of silly. It makes Starfleet look weak, that, they don't have any police, they don't have any guards, they just let aliens go to their starbases and start bar fights over the same things for 40 something years straight and not doing anything about it. So Nausicaans kept bullying and harassing Starfleet officers who play Dom Jot at that starbase for decades, and no one is doing anything about it. So it's kind of silly, but it's still funny, so it's worth it. And all the jokes about the Orions was also funny, and I think there might be a slight continuity issue, because I think in the previous season Tandy said something about Orions no longer being pirates for 5 years or something like that. I remember I talked about it when I reviewed one of the episodes of Star Trek Discovery, when they had the Orions once again being slavers and all of that, and I mentioned the fact that on Lower Decks they said that they are no longer doing that. So I guess it's kind of a flip-flop, but also Tandy said something about, some Orions being good and some bad, and so maybe some Orions are still into that kind of stuff, but she is not. And it was hilarious when she started behaving like an evil Orion and commanding the other Orion men around and all of that, and they were kissing her feet and all of that. That also cracked me up. And there were references to the Orion pheromones and all of that stuff, which I think was mentioned in Enterprise. That's how the Orion women are controlling their society, because they have mind control powers over their men and all of that stuff. So there were some references to that, but then they said she's not capable of that not all Orions can do that and stuff like that. So I love the fact that they used all those correct references, and it was all part of the story. It felt organic. It felt like it's all just taking place in that same universe that was built up in the other shows. So it's not just Easter eggs. It actually played around with all the toys, with all the stuff that was left from the other shows. And so that's why I really like this episode, and it was really funny, and that whole part with the cat doctor sending them to get that box and all of that, and then they thought she wants that toy inside of it, and then it breaks and they have to fix it. And I guess it's kind of a glaring omission that they never once suggested simply using a replicator to remake it. But I guess I think they should have said, she would be able to tell with her sense of smell that it's not the real one or something. So that's why they had to simply rebuild and fix the broken one. They couldn't simply replicate a new one. So they should have mentioned that, I think. But other than that, I love this whole plot of trying to go around and fix it, and then they keep getting in trouble and it just breaks more and more each time. So I thought that was really funny. And the very end, when apparently she never wanted the thing inside the box, she just wanted the box because she's a cat. I thought that part was hilarious, and I'm personally a cat lover, and I'm very familiar with how much cats love boxes and all of that, so I found that part really funny and cute. And it's funny how little screen time Tom Paris actually had in this episode. The episode is kind of named after him. I guess the episode name is a reference to that TNG episode, Will Always Have Paris, and so this one is called Will Always Have Tom Paris. But he actually appears only for a minute or two. But I thought all the jokes with Boimler being a fanboy of him and all of that worked really well. Boimler feels like a Trekkie, like he's the one who watched all the previous shows and he loves them. And that final joke with the K-Zone I thought was brilliant. That was really the funniest moment in my opinion. And again, it's a joke that not everyone will understand. Only people who know Voyager will even get that joke. So this show is definitely for Trekkies who know and love the other shows. Otherwise, you might still enjoy it, but probably not as much. So for newcomers who want to watch all the Star Trek shows, I definitely would tell them to watch this show only after you've watched at least TNG, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. And only then watch the show. Otherwise, so many of the good jokes just wouldn't work on you, and that's a shame. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss it in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.